Welcome to this lecture on metadata collection in linguistic fieldwork projects. Metadata are information about the recordings we make, thus the data about the data. The recordings and later transcriptions of it contain the primary data, sentences or words in the target language, in the language of study. The metadata tells us who was recorded, where the recording took place, what task was given, which language is spoken on the recording, and so on. This is very important information to place the recording into a context. This is important first because it helps the researcher to remember the details at a later point in time. And second, it is invaluable for people who may use the recording in the future but were not present when it was recorded. So this video is a practical guide on metadata collection for a linguistic fieldwork project. For a linguistic fieldwork project, 3 spreadsheets in one workbook are recommended for the metadata collection. First, a spreadsheet with metadata on the recordings made or on the research sessions. Second, a spreadsheet with metadata on the participants, the speakers of the language, or languages under study. And third, it's also recommended to add a spreadsheet which lists abbreviations which are used in the other 2 spreadsheets, and this third sheet may also contain any other notes which explain how to read and understand the information in the 2 metadata spreadsheets, 1 and 2. In general, metadata documentation should be done in a way that anyone who has not worked in the project can understand it. This is essential if the data is going to be archived or in general be used by other people than the researcher who recorded the data. This might not initially be the case, but think of the future and the fact that by working on minority languages, for example, you may produce the only record of the language which is available in the future. So first, I will go into detail about which information should be minimally recorded about each session and about each participant. Then I will say some words about how and when to collect metadata and about how to store them. So in the first spreadsheet, all information on a recording session is noted. It is also possible to record information here on sessions which were not recorded, but may only have resulted in handwritten notes. The session metadata sheet should contain the following columns. A running number first, then the title of the session. The title of the session should say as much as possible about the content of the recording. So don't choose a title such as Village X, 3rd of January 2020, but choose a title which is more related to the content. Then the date of the recording, a session abbreviation or code if this is relevant to the project administration. If you use a code, don't use a running number, but use something which gives hints to the researcher which recording it refers to. Then note the file names of the related recordings, the total length of the recordings, the estimated time of the target language on the recording, if applicable. Here the target language means the language the researcher wants to study. Sometimes there's a lot of non-target language on a recording. For example, if the consent procedure was recorded in another language before, and only after 15 and 20 minutes the speaker starts to speak in the target language. Then note the collector's name, which is usually the name of the researcher or research assistant. Then give a category such as word list, narrative, dialogue, conversation, and then note the languages which are used in the recording, the participant. If the spreadsheet needs to be anonymous, here you can use participant codes, the location of the recording, a description of the content, and finally a field for notes. Also, some administrative columns are useful. They can help the researcher to keep track of the work. For example, available formats of this session, MP4 or WAV, other technical details, right of access if this is relevant, has this recording been transcribed, translated, glossed, archived, or are there any other steps in the process of data processing. So the information about the research participant should be stored in a separate spreadsheet. This makes it possible to keep the metadata sheet of the recordings anonymous if necessary, and it also makes sense to store speaker metadata separately and not together with each recording session, because one speaker can be part of more than one recording. And keeping participants' metadata and recording metadata separate avoids doubling the records on speakers. So the spreadsheet for speaker metadata should contain the following columns. Also a running number, and then the full name of the participant, also information on other names known as, so if it's different from the full name, a speaker code, an abbreviation, which if it's relevant for the research project, and well, this code should also not necessarily be a running number, because it should give a hint to the researcher who the speaker is, but it should not be understandable for outsiders, so it should keep the name anonymous. Then the date of birth, at least the year, age at recording, place of birth, gender, place of residence, livelihood. This means the information about the profession or daily occupation of the speaker. Education, up to which level did the speaker follow education. Languages spoken by the speaker. Mother's place of origin plus possibly native language. Father's place of origin also plus native language, if different. And field for further notes. Again, also some administrative columns are useful here. They can help the researcher to keep track of their work. So first, which recordings did the speaker participate in which recording was the consent obtained, was a social linguistic interview recorded, maybe plus file name, and also other notes. The best moment to collect metadata on the speaker is during or before the consent procedure. In this case, it can be done during the recording if the speaker agrees. The researcher can explain that before they start the task, he would like to ask a few questions about the participant's background. In any case, this information should always be collected on the day of the recording. If this is not done, the risk is high that the information may not be recoverable anymore later. The metadata about the recording should best be noted directly after the recording session. If no computer is at hand, it can first be noted into a notebook and later be transferred to a digital spreadsheet. It may not always be possible to do this directly after the recording. In this case, it is highly recommended to make metadata notes in the end of the same day and not later. In general, if metadata is not immediately noted, the researcher runs a high risk of ending up with incomplete metadata because certain information may not be recoverable anymore after time has passed. This can be because we simply forget the details, because many recordings have been made, or because the speakers are not available anymore to answer our questions. Even if initially metadata might be recorded in a notebook by hand, it should be transferred to a digital format, best a spreadsheet, at some point and regularly. This digital metadata file should be stored together with the recordings of the research project. So here's an example of how such a digital metadata sheet can look like. Use one file for all metadata of the project. This gives you an overview of what you collected and makes it possible to search and sort your recordings according to certain information. You will be able to select all narratives, for example, and count how long they are, etc. So if we use the filters here, so you can, if you select filter here, you will have the option to sort the spreadsheet. For example, according to category, just let's look on all conversations, and then I will get a list with only conversations. I have the total length here, so I can easily use Excel to calculate this. Well, it needs to be time format, yes. So you get a total of about 4 hours of conversation. Right. So that's how you can use a spreadsheet to sort. Here are the other spreadsheets. They can be sorted in the same way, of course. And a note sheet here in the end. To sum up, the most important points from this video are the following. Note metadata on the same day as the recording was made. Store all metadata of the project in one file to have an overview and enable sorting and searching. And make sure that it is possible to publish metadata anonymously if needed. Thank you very much for listening, and see you in the next lecture.